This is House Planning Help, episode 191. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up in this session, my guest is Lloyd Alter from TreeHugger, and we discuss decisions that carry more weight in a project. Because when you're building a house, not all decisions are equal. And so we get into that, particularly thinking about sustainability in this context and the knock-on effect of some of these key decisions. I'm heading back to the National Self-Build and Renovation Centre in a few weeks. I just wanted to let you know about this. They have 3, perhaps 4 key events each year that they like to publicise, and they just turn out to be big weekends where they can share information and you can go and see various exhibitors. And this one, I'm going to be sharing my experience of trying to build a passive house over the last 5 years. It started slowly with research, and then gradually things have moved on. Finally got land to build, we designed the home, we got planning permission for it, and we've specified the project. So things are moving, and we'll get to that. I hope that would be very odd to finally be building it. So find out when my presentation is. We'll share all the links to get you across to the National Self-Build and Renovation Centre, houseplanninghelp.com/events. And even if this is behind us now in terms of time, there'll be other things where I hope to get along to. So that URL/events will be kept up to date. A year or so back, I had to make the decision on whether to focus this podcast on the UK market or the world market. I just felt myself at a fork in the roads. There are lots of things that you can talk about, that you can generalize around the world. However, there are lots more things very specific to each country and ways of doing it. And I felt that the logical progression was to knuckle down on the UK market. And I think that's been the right decision. I certainly am in no danger of running out of things to talk about. But one of the downsides of that decision, not having the chance to catch up with a few international friends. And I suppose there's no reason why we can't do the odd podcast, just getting inspiration from abroad. I just need to get it all organised. But when a certain friend arrives in London town, I think, well, hold on. This is a good opportunity to catch up. We've had it on the podcast before. I'm talking about Lloyd Alter from TreeHugger. He also writes for Mother Nature Network, The Guardian, and various other publications and websites. So I meet up with him every so often, or mainly chat online, I think. And we went and had a cup of tea. Very nice it was too. I took my microphone because I thought it might come in handy. And this, we didn't have an episode planned, but I'd had this idea in my mind as I've gone through this process that there are certain points when you make a decision, you make lots of decisions, but certain decisions that are more important than others, and particularly in the context of sustainability. So I wanted to chat with him about that, get his input, and he's obviously a great storyteller. So there's a lot in this episode today. I hope you enjoy it. I started though by asking what he's up to, because he does like to travel.
Oh, I do. It's a joy. I was just in Copenhagen at this wonderful design awards that they give the awards for sustainability. And they have brought me over. This is the 3rd time every 2 years. And it's really a highlight because they treat me nicely and they show me wonderful things. And I get to come to London afterwards.
When you do your travelling, I'm imagining you're picking up lots of things. I often see your tweets. What is it you like about Copenhagen?
Well, the main reason I like it is that I've become really serious about low-energy transportation, about how good a bicycle is, not just for getting around, but how good it is for your health. I've been recently involved where I live in Toronto, where they're putting in bike lanes, and a lot of people my age who are not very fit, a little bit older perhaps, say, oh, you can't take out the parking spots. I can't walk that far. I need to park in front of a store. And then you go to Copenhagen or Malmo, and you see people of all ages walking around. You see them of all ages on their bicycles. You see them out there so much more fit. I recently read a Guardian article where they mentioned that 50% of Britons over the age of 40 don't walk more than 10 minutes consecutively in a month, which means all they're doing is walking from their parking spot to their car and from their car to the office, and that's the only exercise that they get in a month. And this is something that we radically, radically have to change, or we're just going to be in a crisis. We're not going to be able to stay in our homes. We're not going to be able to get around. We're not going to be able to live. And there's a huge population boom that's getting older all at once that has to be dealt with.
I think today's discussion could go in a few directions. I'd like to centre it around just my experience of going through the preparation for a house build and talk about some of the key decisions, very specific things that can carry more weight than a lot of the other decisions. So we haven't fleshed this out fully, and I'm just going to fire a few of these at you and we'll see where we go. So the first one being size. How important is that?
I think it's the single most important decision that has to be made. Everything relates to size. Obviously, the cost of building is directly proportional to the size, so that the budget that you've got, the time you get to build, everything relates on the size. There's an other side to the side issue, though, that's really problematic, is that once you find, for instance, with certain contractors, they don't want to get out of bed for a contract less than $1 million or whatever. They've got a fixed income that they want to get. So, in fact, when you go to a builder and say, I want to build 100 square meters, you find that when it starts getting bigger to 1,200 and 1,500 square meters, you've already paid for the bathroom, you've already paid the architect's fees, you've already paid for the kitchen. And so you just think, well, it's just air that I'm really adding, so I can make it bigger. So people do make it bigger, because I don't know if it's the same in Britain, but in America, there's this disease I call square footitis, that everybody is obsessed with the cost per square foot. And so they look at houses and they say, wow, this house is only $200 per square foot, but the house is 50% bigger than the one that cost $300 per square foot. So people are buying more than they need. They're buying poorer quality because they're using completely the wrong criterion to measure value. And price per square foot, or I guess in Britain, pounds per square meter, I'm not sure how you measure them these days, is not a criterion that's useful at all. In fact, it's dangerous. So the point is that it will cost you more per unit of area to build smaller, but the aggregate, it will still cost you less. And when you factor in operating costs and maintenance costs, they are all going to be less with the smaller dwelling.
Here's an aspect for you. Again, it may change around the world. I have discovered that actually the size of the house is actually something that the piece of land dictates.
Well, yes, that is a case in many municipalities where there are zoning bylaws that militate against building small and efficient houses. Where I live, they have minimum square footages set in their bylaws because they want to get a minimum tax base, which is based on the value of the building. So I've gone to the authorities and saying, this is a summer place and they're only going to be using it and they only want to build 90 square meters, and the bylaw says you have to have a minimum of 100 square meters, and they throw you out. They just don't want to know about this. So everybody's so concerned about the tax assessment and the look and feel that they say that's too small. And I think that's really problematic. I think minimum square area requirements should be illegal because people should be allowed to build as small as they want on a given property.
There's also the economics of it, though, that if you do build small, you are taking the hit yourself because you're paying the money for the land. This is what I've found. And although I'm building a much smaller house than the land had permission for, I've got to make it the right value. And I've seen this before where people have built great houses and actually they've lost money when they've come to sell them.
Yes, this is absolutely a factor as well. First of all, when you buy the property, when you put in the services, I don't know if you have on-site septic or whether you're connected to the mains in the community, when you bring everything in, it costs the same, whether it's a big house or a little house. And so, first of all, the house itself becomes a much smaller proportion of the overall cost of the project than you think it's going to be. And then when you do go to sell, what people care about is the house. They don't care about how much the plumbing costs, how much the architect costs. So you make a valid point that if you build too small, at some point down the road when you want to sell, there might well be a problem. But as you've seen just in a house that you showed me today in one of your wonderful videos, houses don't seem to last forever anymore either. I mean, in most of what going around London and for most of what I see in North America, houses have almost become disposable, that people are buying for the land and they want the latest new thing. It almost militates against building a really good quality house because they don't seem to be building them forever anymore.
So it's the land, obviously it's not going to be everywhere, but the land that really has the value, not the building.
Yes. I would say so.
Interesting one. Okay, and closely tied into that is location. We've already mentioned Copenhagen bicycles,
yes.
But I tried to buy land in my town because I knew I had some great facilities there. It was just difficult. So I've had to go further out into the countryside.
Well, unfortunately, I think this is universal in the self-build trade, is that most of the land is controlled by developers. Most of the land closer to towns is hugely expensive, and everyone I know who's done it, or when I practiced as an architect 20 years ago, it was always a case that unless you were extraordinarily wealthy, that's what you had to do to build your own house. And it's a contradiction, it's a problem. I know one of the greenest people I know who actually runs a big green website, Building Green, Alex Wilson, in Brattleboro, Vermont, ended up building his house 9 kilometers away from the town. And she said, this is way too far. This is way too far. I know, but I drive a Prius when I drive. My wife and I have gotten seriously about cycling, and we bicycle to town even though it's 9 kilometers. And we're very, very careful about our shopping to make as few trips as we possibly can. We never order from Amazon and have their trucks coming all the way out from here and there. And so they've restyled their life to accept the fact that, yes, I know this was not what I should be doing, living out this far away, but I didn't have a choice, so I'm going to do everything else I can to actually mitigate that. And building passive houses you are doing is, of course, one of the best things you can do to mitigate your other energy hog things. I lead a very green life. I bicycle everywhere. I keep my house at incredibly low temperatures, but every time I go to put something into a green calculator to figure out my footprint, I get just completely blown out of the water because I love traveling and coming to England and getting on airplanes. And I know absolutely that I should say, for living the kind of life that I want to live, I shouldn't be getting on airplanes. But we all have to make some compromises and exceptions and have dirty little green secrets.
What about slow travel? Isn't that a concept where you've come to London, you stay here for a year now?
Oh, yes. I've written about that. It would be absolutely wonderful.
Just doesn't work.
Yes. Well, it depends on your circumstance. I was in Copenhagen with a young man, Mike, who is the editor of a big green website called Inhabitat. And he's the editor-in-chief of it, but because it's an entirely internet-based business, he's come over. He's now going to go sit on a beach in Portugal for the next month and write his website from a beach in Portugal. And being single and being flexible, he can do that. He, in fact, says he has an entire life in his backpack. And that would be a nice way, a nice low-impact way to go. Slow travel is a wonderful idea. I wish I could do it.
Let's move on then. We'll get back to some of these key decisions. Are there any other key decisions that pop into your mind that they're just critical in a project build that will affect the sustainability? I've got lots more. If you want me to throw in one, I can.
Well, I was going to say something that you might have on the tip of your tongue. I used to practice as an architect, and it was hard. It was very hard to work with people, particularly couples, and get them to make decisions and to go in the right direction. And I often thought, this is a terrible, terrible job. I don't want to be a marriage counselor. I want to design houses. But what I found is that, in a sense, there has to be someone independent. There has to be someone with a base of knowledge. I remember once going to a seminar with a brilliant Canadian writer who was hired to speak to a big architectural conference, not about his house renovation, but about some other technical thing. And he, of course, knowing he was talking to architects, stood up and said, "I'm so happy to be talking to architects. I just renovated my own house. I didn't use an architect. It was an old stone house in the countryside, and I put 7 inches of polyurethane foam in the inside wall." And everybody in the place just rolls their eyes, because in the Canadian climate with really wide freeze-thaw cycles, if you put 7 inches of polyurethane on the inside, the stone is never going to get warm. The water is going to get into the moisture and freeze. The house is going to crack apart. My next-door neighbor, an expert on heritage buildings, said, "Well, he just destroyed that house." So for many different reasons, even whether you've got the independent adjudicator working with families, whether you've got the technical expertise to do it right, whether you can plan it right. One of my bywords that I talk about all the time, in fact, my motto, if you look on TreeHugger, is that the key to sustainability is living with less, and the key to living with less is to have it designed properly. If you have a crappy plan with millions of corridors and bends and wasted space and things like that, you're paying more for a poor living experience. Whereas this is why I think an architect is so useful, in that they can help you get to the essentials and put the essentials together in the most efficient and satisfying and beautiful way that most people can't do themselves.
And this does fall onto my list in some way, because that is just such a big decision, selecting that architect. Any tips on how you might do that, or a builder?
It's really, really hard. I don't know what to say. It's, I think, easier than saying I'm going to choose a kidney surgeon. You know, it's something that you can, as a layperson, judge. You know, you can't go and say, "Oh, you know, he did a good job on that person's kidneys." You can look at somebody else's house and say, "I really like that house." So obviously, experience and looking at what they've done and whether you like what they've done is really important. Of course, when I was a young, starving architect, I complained, "No one will give me a chance or an opportunity because I haven't done enough for them to see and judge, and I want them just to trust me and give me a chance." Which is why I think most architects end up designing houses for their parents. You know, that's the only way that they actually get a start. It's very hard. But I think the two most important things are go and look at the work they've done, and 2, spend enough time talking with them and drinking coffee with them that you like them and you think they understand you. Because there are many architects that people go to because they say, it's the old Ayn Rand, Howard Rourke thing, "I'm an architect, I'm a genius, you hire me and you get what I give you." This is a very, very small proportion of architects, but they exist. So the important thing, I think, is it's a subject where, unlike the kidney doctor, you can do your homework. You can go see what they've done. You can talk to them, and you should be able to understand what they're saying. If you read architectural magazines, you can't understand a word that architects write, because there's this whole architectese language that they use among themselves to impress. But when you're a client, you shouldn't have to deal with that. You should be able to understand what they're saying.
What do you think about simplicity? I've put a question mark next to this one. I find it very difficult these days, having done all this learning over the last 5 years, to understand when things get too complicated. Maybe I'm just too into Passive House, but what are your thoughts on that?
This is a subject that I get worked up about. It's a few years ago, in fact, still going on is this whole concept of the smart home, where people are putting solar panels in their roofs that are controlled by their Nest thermostats, and the Nest thermostat talks to the furnace, which comes on when it detects from your smartphone that you're a couple of blocks away, and all of this complexity where your dishwasher is talking to your stove, which is talking to your smartphone again. And houses get very complex. In the States, you can get smart vents because they have hopelessly bad forced air furnaces that drive air through noisy ducts, that close and open the ducts. And all of this smart home is so popular. And my attitude is I like a dumb home. I have always been saying in praise of the dumb home. And I use the passive house as a real example of a dumb home. A smart thermostat, for instance, goes on, when people are coming home, it turns up the heat. It turns down the heat depending on the occupancy. It adjusts the heat because in a crappy home, the heat changes really quickly. In a passive house, a smart thermostat would be bored stupid. It would have nothing to do because the house retains the same temperature inside thanks to all of the insulation. You don't need a smart thermostat. In most cases, you don't even need a thermostat. So the house takes care of itself. It's the same with complex systems like solar panels connected to the grid, going in, going out. Are you buying your power? Are you storing your power? To me, the answer again is the passive house routine, which is to use less power, to not worry about how much electricity am I getting from the solar panels, but to think about how little electricity do I need at all. When you look now at with LED bulbs that use almost nothing, lighting load has ceased to be existing as a problem. In a passive house, heating load is pretty negligible, so that what you've got then are really the things that you use yourself. Your stove and your fridge and your vacuum cleaner and your iron are the things that are using electricity. And those are all things that they don't need to be very smart. You turn them on when you need them, you turn them off when you don't. So simplicity to me is one of the critical things that should be designed into the house in the first place. There's a whole theory out there in open buildings that things last different lengths of time, different periods. So your land will last forever. The frame of your house could last 500 years. The cladding, 200 years. But certain things like windows, it might be 100 years. Plumbing might be 50 years. Electrical, 20 years the technology changes, and mechanical systems may be as little as 10. So houses have to be designed in a simple way that you can get at these things, that you can fix them to have as few systems as possible in your house at all. I was looking at a house a few years ago, and this is something that I think everyone should plan for now, is to make sure that if you're building a house now, that your electric wiring is all accessible. Maybe you design it so that it all runs behind the baseboards, so that you can pull off the baseboards in 10 years and replace the wiring. Because I guarantee you the high voltage electric current that you're using now with LEDs and with your computers and your smartphone, everything running on low voltage DC wiring, that in not too long all our houses will be running on DC. So you have to think about these future changes and keep it all simple, put as little of it as you need in, because at some point you're going to have to redo it anyway.
Lots of things that you brought up in there. Let's just touch on one first while it's in my head. Renewables. Do we have a duty to generate on our schemes at the end? I know we've done all that stuff beforehand, haven't we? We've reduced all the energy we're going to need.
I think absolutely not. I think that it's fundamentally wrong to be saying that every house, every person in Britain has to be generating their own electricity, because what it does is it disproportionately favors people who have nice south-facing roofs. And it is not fair to people who live in multiple family housing, for instance, where the proportion of roof to the number of people below is much lower. There's not enough roof on a multifamily dwelling. If you build a really tiny house that's really vertical, or again, a sort of multifamily house, it's not fair or reasonable. If you live with your cousin and you have 6 kids running around the house and your energy use is higher, it's not fair to them in a sense. The key is to reduce our consumption as much as possible and to not favor those people who happen to have roofs in their houses that face south and can generate this electricity and live in a part of the country that gets enough light. What happens when we do this, when we try to have everybody self-reliant on electricity, is that they're getting the money back from the government and those feed-in tariffs that they all still have. But the poorer person who doesn't have the roof or can't afford the solar panels, they're going to be paying more for their electricity. So it's not fair to the people with less money when the whole thing gets structured. Oh, I'm rich, I've got a solar panel on the roof, because somebody has to pay for the grid, somebody has to pay for the distribution system. It's got to be fair and equitable for everyone. And what's fair and equitable for everyone is for everyone to be living in houses that are built to a higher standard that use less energy. If you look at the amount of energy that's used for transportation, if you look at the amount of energy used for building roads and building infrastructure for cars, and you compare it to what we're saving by having people have a few solar panels on the roof, it's inconsequential. We should be going after the big things, and that's efficiency, not solar panels on the roofs. Solar panels on the roofs also add complexity. They have problems of their own. A neighbor of mine who had solar panels on the roofs had to bring in a whole truck with a crane and a guy and a basket to go on the top, remove all their solar panels because squirrels had moved in underneath. Roofs, they're sitting 3 inches above. It was a perfect squirrel habitat, and they ate through the shingles and got into the roof and to fix it all. And I said, well, didn't anyone think about this? What are we adding to our houses when we're doing this? So, I get in a lot of trouble with this all the time because I say, no, net zero carbon is not a reasonable target. I used to joke that I could make my tent zero carbon by putting enough solar panels on the roof. As long as I'm generating the energy, it's okay. Well, it's not okay. We have to use less, period, even if we're trying to offset it with energy from sun or wind.
I feel we're getting close to wrapping things up. That was almost a good place to leave it, but I still have a couple of things that I want to mention that are on my list. The other being whatever build system you use to construct your house. Are we at that stage where we're almost favouring some methods of building, or will there always be a complete range? And a bit like we said about sometimes you want to fly, well, sometimes you want to build in this particular way.
I teach sustainable design at Ryerson University in Toronto, Canada. And it's really hard because in a lot of courses, if you're teaching history or mathematics and that, it doesn't change that quickly. Things change over time, but in the sustainable design building, it can change every year. 10 years ago, if I was to be talking about it, it's insulated, and I loved foam. I loved spray foam that you put it in and it seals it, and it's great, and isn't this wonderful? You get such a good efficiency. And then, of course, now we've learned what goes into making foam. We've learned that it's full of flame retardants that are bad for us, that certain foams like polyisocyanurate actually doesn't work below 3 degrees Celsius, that there's something in it. And they said, oh, well, we didn't know that. That we've learned so much that now the hot trend that everybody's doing is insulating with essentially shredded newspaper, the lowest carbon thing you can use. I know a lot of people are doing. I'm still not 100% comfortable with cellulose insulation and prefer rock wool, but it's always evolving, always what is going to be. So I don't think you can say this is the way to build or that's the way to build. Some people like structural insulated panels. And I say, okay, you've got particle board that's glued to styrofoam and that's your whole wall. What will that look like in 50 years? I worry about that. I mean, as an architect, I don't think my liability lasts that long, but still, I worry about sort of experimental techniques, about new techniques. I become very, very conservative as I've gotten older. And so...
And you talked about thermal mass as well in
Right.
one of your posts that I read a while ago, which I think is another interesting point, because I'm building with brick and block, and I quite like this idea of having a little bit of thermal mass, but I know you've completely had a turnaround in thoughts on that. So, I am just thinking that way and could be completely wrong.
Oh, I had a line 10 years ago. I wrote in an article that with the catchy headline, "You don't need to go to church to celebrate Mass," because I was just so into this idea that, it would hold the heat in the day and release it at night, which works fabulously if you live in the high Arizona desert where it's hot in the day and it's cold at the night. But when you get to a climate like, I believe, the UK or Canada where I am, where the temperature between night and day isn't that different, then you're not getting those kinds of cycles where the thermal mass is as useful as it is where in the south, where people built out of adobe and now they might use that. I worry with your brick and your concrete about the carbon dioxide that goes into the mortar and the firing of the bricks and all of that, which is giving you a big carbon dioxide hit before you even start your construction. And I worry that if you're insulating on the inside, which I'm assuming you are...
It's a cavity.
It's a cavity, so you're insulating between the
blocks.
The blocks. Well, I'd have to take a moment to think about the effect of the thermal mass there. In fact, I don't have any response at all to that situation. I was going to say that if it's on the outside,
yes,
then I don't think the mass is doing anything. And if it's the inside with 200 millimeters of cellulose insulation or whatever it is, it's not doing anything either. It's the insulation doing the work. If you put it in the middle, that's a whole other kettle of fish that I don't know the response to.
One more thing that I wanted to bring up, and this is the importance of who is developing this project, because for me, sustainability is a key driver, but I'm not the only person in this. I have my wife, who is also a very good project manager and makes decisions very quickly and writes back emails before I can even get myself prepared. So I think that's an interesting one that a lot of people perhaps don't think about, that building in a couple, some things, I'm very pleased that I never said right at the beginning I'm going to build the greatest house, because there have been a lot of things that have happened where I thought, oh, well, given a bit more time, maybe I could have done better.
I think that the biggest problem with much of the sustainability movement, and that's a holdover from sort of the hippie movement and the stuff that we were building back in the 70s, is, and for the early years of this sustainability movement starting 10 or 15 years ago, is that a lot of people think that if you're going to be green, you have to suffer, that you have to give something up. So your car's not going to go as fast, or your shower heads are going to dribble a little bit of water instead of being a comfortable shower, or that it's going to be uncomfortable, or all of these things. And I think that the movement has evolved enough that what we're selling now, what people should be selling is, it's not about energy and it's not about carbon dioxide. Those are nice benefits, but what we're really looking for is comfort and happiness. And if you say this house is going to be incredibly comfortable and even, and you're going to be able to sit by the windows in any weather and enjoy them, and when the electricity goes out, the house is going to be warm for a week and you're not going to have to worry about it, well, people who don't give any care at all about energy or carbon are going to say, well, that's a nice feature. I can live with that. I can accept that. If you tell them that the air quality is going to be fantastic and they're not going to get asthma and it's going to be and pollen and hay fever because the filter in the simple air system is going to filter it all out, and you're really going to be healthier because of it, no one's going to say, no, I really want to crappy air in my house. It's the problem with the movement is we were always selling sort of self-righteousness and better than thou-ness, instead of saying, I want to be warm and comfortable and not have to worry about things. And I think with any spouse, if you went and in any discussion and you said, we're not doing this because I care about green, we're doing this because I want you to be happy and comfortable, it's an easy sell.
Well, I think on our project, at least, that's something that I'm hoping we have got right. So it's a good conclusion. Is there anything else that you feel to round us off today on these discussions, major decisions during a project that impact on sustainability? We've covered a lot of ground.
Well, I think that things are going to be changing in the next few years in our society. We are going through a lot of political turmoil everywhere. I think that a word that people really should think more about when they're doing these things is resilience, about what are you thinking about in terms of when the power goes out? What do how long will you comfortably last? Do you have room for some storage? I used to say do everything small, 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 but perhaps there should be room for storage of water, of food, of things like that. In difficult times, it's nice to think that your home is safe, secure, and resilient. So look at your plot if you're self-building and make sure that it's high enough and not in the middle of a floodplain. Think about what you do when the electricity goes out. Think what you do if you have to bicycle to the nearest store to get a quart of milk, that you can actually do it, because that's what a home is supposed to be, a place of security and comfort, and that's what we should all be striving for.
Lloyd, always fun to catch up with you. Thank you.
A pleasure. Thank you.
We've been taking the notes so that you don't have to, and you can check them out today, houseplanninghelp.com/191. We've summarised all the main points so you can review it at your leisure. If you have a comment or you'd like to ask a question, scroll down to the bottom of the show notes. There's a place to do it there. We'll link you across to Lloyd on Twitter. He's always active and busy, as he is on TreeHugger. We'll point you to their website, houseplanninghelp.com/191. Let's finish on a hub update, and I wanted to answer the question, is the hub right for me? So this is the membership community that I run, and as you might have heard earlier in this episode, the hub, along with House Planning Help, we're very much aimed at the UK market. It doesn't mean that there's not value if you're elsewhere in the world, and we do have members all around the world. However, there's a lot of content about the UK process, and we will be adding more as time goes on. So we want to equip you with the knowledge and support to make solid progress through your self-build project and not really hit any lows. Sometimes it will get tough. Yes, we understand that. I watched an episode of Grand Designs the other day where the guy had bought a piece of land that he'd never seen. It was on a slope, and I think he was going into it blind. And as it got towards the end of the project, this guy had done really well, but you could see he was a broken man. And at all costs, we want all of our members to avoid this state. You don't want to look at the house and just hate it. So we want you to get through successfully. That's the whole purpose of what we're trying to do in the hub. Our main way of doing that is various courses. They've been text-based for a while, but we're trying to completely overhaul that and turn them into videos so that they're nice and easy for you to consume. Maybe you've got back from work or something. You don't want anything too heavy. However, still trying to transform you from that point A to point B or point B to point C just to take you through the process. We've also got our in-depth video case studies. It's 2 at the moment, Buckinghamshire Passive House and also Long Barrow. And we're just about to start filming on my own project, just covering a lot of ground that we've mentioned in the podcast. However, I can show you things now, show you documents. And so we will put that all together. I'm looking forward to getting stuck in there. We've got the progress calls that we hold monthly. Janet Cottrell's been a recent guest on that from Passive House Homes, and we had a really good call. Sometimes it's just us talking through our projects, things that we're facing. That could also happen inside the forum. So those are the main elements. And what I think I'm going to be really doing, along with developing all that course material over the next couple of years, is sorting out a roadmap, trying to make it as easy as possible, something to follow as you go through this. So that's my plan. If you want to find out more information, then you can do that at houseplanninghelp.com/join. There we go, we're done for another day. Next time, Michael Holmes from Home Building and Renovating is my guest. He's also the chairman of NACSPA, the National Custom and Self-Build Association. So we're going to be looking at the right to build legislation. Now that I have land, perhaps I don't do as many podcasts on it. I know it is still the number one issue that's stopping people from building, so this is important. Let's talk about right to build. We'll do that next time. I hope you can be there for that. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.